Most people think markets are natural. People buy, people sell, prices move, factories grow, and society becomes richer. That is the old story. It sounds simple, it sounds obvious, but in 1944, Karl Polanyi told a different story. He wrote The Great Transformation during a world crisis. Europe had seen depression, mass unemployment, fascism, and war. Polanyi asked a frightening question. What if the market society did not fail by accident? What if it failed because it asked too much from human life? Before the modern age, markets existed. People traded grain, cloth, tools, animals, and land. Merchants kept accounts, ports handled goods, coins changed hands, but the market was not the whole society. It was one part of life. In the 19th century, that changed. Society was rebuilt around the market. Land, labor, money, even human survival, all were pushed into one giant price system. This video is not about markets as simple progress. It is about how society became a market. Polanyi said 19th century civilization rested on 4 pillars: the balance of power in Europe, the international gold standard, the self-regulating market, and the liberal state. Think of them like 4 legs holding up a table. If one leg breaks, the table shakes. If the central leg breaks, the whole thing falls. For Polanyi, the central pillar was the self-regulating market. That means a market that tries to run by itself. Prices decide, wages decide, gold flows decide. Governments are told not to interfere. From 1815 to 1914, Europe had what some called a long peace between the great powers. This did not mean there was no violence. There were colonial wars, there was imperial conquest, there were brutal conflicts outside Europe. But between the major European powers, general war was largely avoided for a century. Trade expanded, railways spread, banks connected capitals, gold moved between London, Paris, and other financial centers. It looked like order, it looked like civilization, but Polanyi saw something fragile underneath. A society cannot be held together by prices alone. People are not coins, land is not a machine, and money is not just metal. The system looked permanent. Inside banks, ledgers balanced, gold reserves were counted, ships crossed oceans, factories produced goods, governments defended currency values. To many people, this looked like the natural order of the modern world. A world of contracts, a world of trade, a world of progress. Then it broke. The First World War shattered the balance of power. The 1920s brought financial strain. The 1930s brought depression and mass unemployment. The gold standard collapsed. Fascism rose. For Polanyi, this was not just bad luck. It was the result of trying to build society around a market that could never truly run by itself. Before this market society, economic life was embedded. That means it lived inside family, religion, custom, law, and community. A village market could sell bread. But the village was not built only for bread prices. People had duties, rights, shared land, local rules, religious obligations, family expectations. The economy was inside society. The 19th century tried to reverse that. It tried to put society inside the economy. Polanyi's big claim was simple for most of history. Society contained the economy. Modern market society tried to make the economy contain society. That is a huge reversal. Imagine a house. In the old world, the market was one room in the house, important but limited. In the new world, the market tried to become the whole house, the kitchen, the bedroom, the school, the church, the field, even the family's future. Polanyi also challenged an old myth. The myth says early humans were natural traders, that people began by bartering one thing for another, a fish for a shoe, a goat for a sack of grain. But Polanyi argued that early economies were often organized by reciprocity, redistribution, and householding. People exchanged gifts. Chiefs or authorities redistributed food families produced for their own use. Markets existed, profit existed, trade existed. But Polanyi's point was deeper. Human life was not always ruled by market prices. A person's worth was not always measured by wages. Land was not always treated as a price tag, and survival was not always left to the market. The Great Reversal was not just an idea. It changed daily life. A farmer who once used common land now needed money rent. A worker who once had small rights to fuel, gleaning, or local help now needed wages. A family that once survived partly through custom now faced prices. Bread prices, rent prices, wage rates. The market became disembedded. That means it was pulled out of social control. Instead of asking, what does the community need? The new system asked, what does the market demand? This sounds abstract, but picture a mother standing at a bread stall. She does not eat because the market is efficient. She eats if her wages can buy bread. If wages fall, she suffers. If rent rises, she suffers. If work disappears, she suffers. A market can be useful for selling shoes, but can it safely decide whether a family eats? That was Polanyi's worry. He did not say every market is bad. He said society becomes dangerous when the market becomes the master, because a society cannot survive if every human need is exposed to the market like a product on a shelf. One of Polanyi's most famous lines is that laissez-faire was planned. That sounds strange. Laissez-faire means the government should leave markets alone. Polanyi argued that free markets had to be created by law. Officials changed land rules. Parliaments passed acts. Police enforced property. Poor laws were rewritten. Labor rules changed. The market did not simply grow like a tree, it was built like a machine. To understand why this mattered, we need one simple definition. A real commodity is something produced for sale. A shoe can be a commodity, someone makes it to sell it. A chair can be a commodity. A sack of grain can be a commodity, but labor is different. Labor is not a thing made in a factory. Labor is human activity. It comes with the living person. A chair can wait in a shop. A human being cannot. A sack of grain can sit in a warehouse. A worker has to eat. When labor is sold, a piece of human life is being rented out by the hour. That is why Polanyi called labor a fictitious commodity. Land is also not a normal commodity. Land is nature, fields, forests, rivers, soil. The earth was not produced for sale, but modern market society treated land as if it were just another item with a price tag. That meant common fields could be fenced, forests could be sold, homes could be cleared, nature could be turned into property. Money was the third fiction. A gold coin looks like a thing, but money is more than metal. It is purchasing power, it is trust, it is credit, it is created and managed through banks, laws, and state finance. When money is treated like a simple commodity, societies can be forced into crisis just because credit dries up. So Polanyi named three fictitious commodities: labor, land, money, human life, nature, purchasing power. These were not made for sale, but 19th century society organized itself as if they were. This is the core of the book. The market needed these things to behave like commodities, but they were not real commodities. That was the hidden danger. Once labor, land, and money were treated as commodities, society could be organized as one big market. Workers had to sell labor. Land had to find its highest price. Money had to follow financial rules. This sounds orderly, but for ordinary people, it could feel like exposure. Imagine a family losing access to common land. No free firewood, no cow on the common, no grazing rights. No gleaning leftover grain after harvest. Now everything needs wages: food, fuel, rent, clothing. If wages stop, life stops. This is why Polanyi cared so much about protection. Protection was not always laziness. Sometimes protection meant survival, but Polanyi also said the market threatened business itself. A factory needs workers, raw materials, customers, and money. If credit suddenly disappears, even a productive business can collapse. It is like a drought. A farmer may have good soil, but without rain, the crop dies. A factory may have machines, but without purchasing power, it can close. The market threatened both society and production. To see this in real life, look at English land before enclosure. Many villages used an open field system. Families farmed scattered strips. They also used common pastures, meadows, and woods. This was not perfect, but it was not chaos. Villagers shared expensive tools. Ox teams were costly. Heavy plows required cooperation. Local courts and customs could set grazing limits. The commons had rules. A poor family might not own much land, but small rights mattered. A few animals on common pasture. Wood gathered for fuel. Leftover grain after harvest. These were not luxuries. They were the difference between dependence and survival. Then wool became profitable. From the 15th to 17th centuries, many landowners converted arable land into sheep pasture. Sheep needed fewer people than grain fields. Villages could be emptied. Homes could be torn down. Thomas More famously wrote that sheep had become so hungry they devoured men. The phrase was dramatic, but the point was clear. A market opportunity in wool could destroy a human settlement. Polanyi called enclosure a revolution of the rich against the poor. That does not mean every enclosure happened the same way. Some brought agricultural improvement, some raised output, but the social cost was real. Land that had been shared became private property. Custom became contract. Access became exclusion. From about 1750 to 1850, parliamentary enclosure made this process legal and systematic. Acts of Parliament helped turn irregular open fields into fenced private plots. Surveyors measured. Maps were redrawn. Boundaries were fixed. For large landowners, this could mean efficiency. For poor rural families, it could mean losing small but vital rights. Gathering fuel, gleaning grain, keeping a cow, using common pasture, these may sound small. But for a poor household, they were survival tools. Think of them like a backup battery. Not enough to power everything, but enough to keep life going when wages failed. When those rights disappeared, wages became the main way to live. The labor market was not born from freedom alone. It was born from losing alternatives. There is a hard truth here. Enclosure could raise output. Some modern economic studies suggest parliamentary enclosure helped improve agriculture, including a large rise in wheat yields in some estimates. But higher output does not erase human loss. A field can become more efficient while a family becomes less secure. A farm can produce more wheat while a laborer loses independence. That is the kind of trade-off this story keeps returning to. Then came 1795, bad harvests, high grain prices, war pressure during the French Wars, fear of rural unrest. In Berkshire, magistrates met at the Pelican Inn in Speenhamland. They created a poor relief system tied to the price of bread. The idea was simple. If wages were too low to buy enough bread, the parish would supplement the worker's income. If bread prices rose, the allowance rose. If a family had more children, the allowance changed. This was called the Speenhamland system. It created a kind of right to live, but it also created a major debate. Was this protection, or did it trap workers in poverty? Polanyi thought Speenhamland became a fool's paradise. He argued that it allowed employers to pay wages below subsistence. The parish made up the difference. So the worker survived, but the wage system was distorted. Polanyi believed this slowed the creation of a modern labor market and helped pauperize rural workers, but later historians have challenged this. They argue Polanyi relied too heavily on the 1834 Royal Commission report. That report blamed Speenhamland for laziness, moral decay, and population growth, but modern scholars see the report as biased and ideological. Still, the report helped justify a harsh change. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 restricted outdoor relief. Aid would now be given mainly inside workhouses, and workhouses were designed to be worse than the lowest paid job outside. This was called less eligibility. The message was brutal work for wages, or face the workhouse. It was not just a welfare reform, it was a way to make the labor market unavoidable. Polanyi saw 1834 as a turning point. By weakening the old safety net, the law pushed poor people into the labor market. This is why the birth of the labor market was not simply about freedom, it was also about pressure. If you had no land, no relief, and no common rights, wages became your lifeline. Modern historians complicate this story. Speenhamland may not have caused the poverty trap Polanyi described. Rural poverty also came from enclosure, threshing machines, price shocks, and changes in money. That correction matters, but Polanyi's bigger point still lands. A labor market is not just a place where jobs are offered, it is a society where survival depends on selling labor. Now look at money. A banknote feels simple. You hold it, you spend it. But behind it are banks, laws, trust, and state power. Money is not just gold, it is an institution. When society forgets that, money can become a weapon of discipline, and the gold standard was the most famous example. The gold standard tried to make money obey one global rule. Currencies were tied to gold. Governments had to defend that link. If gold flowed out of a country, credit tightened. Interest rates could rise. Prices could fall. Wages could be squeezed. Danny Roderick later called this kind of constraint a golden straitjacket. It is a useful image. It was like tying a country's wallet to a metal box. A government may want to help workers, but the gold rule says, protect the currency first. A country may need spending, but gold says, cut back. Deflation was especially dangerous. Deflation means prices fall. That may sound good if you're buying bread, but if prices fall across the economy, businesses earn less. Debts become harder to pay. Factories close. Workers lose jobs. It is like the oxygen leaving a room. Nothing explodes, but everyone starts to suffocate. For Polanyi, money treated as a commodity could endanger the whole society. The crisis of 1847 showed the danger. A poor harvest forced Britain to import food. Gold flowed out to pay for imports. The financial system tightened. People panicked for currency. Businesses failed. The Bank of England was supposed to follow strict rules under Peel's Act, but in crisis, the government suspended the rules. The bank was allowed to issue notes beyond the strict limit. Why? Because the automatic system needed human rescue. This is one of Polanyi's strongest points. The self-regulating market was never truly self-regulating. Someone had to manage it. Central bankers watched reserves. Governments changed laws. Officials pulled emergency levers. The machine that claimed to run by itself kept needing repair. So the rule was clear. In normal times, society was told to obey the market. In crisis, the market needed society to save it. That is not a free market floating above politics. That is a market held together by institutions. Polanyi called this struggle the double movement. One movement pushed markets outward. Free trade, laissez-faire. Gold discipline, labor markets, land markets, money markets. The other movement pushed back. Factory laws, public health rules, trade unions, tariffs, poor relief, social protection. Think of it like a door. One force keeps pushing it open. The other keeps trying to stop the room from being destroyed by the wind. Economic liberalism wanted a self-regulating market, but society reacted because people were getting hurt. Workers needed limits on factory danger. Families needed relief. Cities needed sanitation. Businesses sometimes needed protection from financial shocks. This protection was not always one ideology. It came from workers, farmers, landlords, officials, and even some business groups. Different people wanted protection for different reasons, but they shared one fear. A market without limits can tear society apart. Polanyi argued that laissez-faire was planned, but social protection was often not planned. It rose from emergencies. A child injured in a factory, a polluted street, a town facing disease, a worker with no bargaining power, a farmer crushed by imports. Economic liberals sometimes blamed protection on conspiracy. They imagined trade unions, landlords, or collectivists secretly blocking freedom, but many protective laws were practical. Factory inspection was practical. Public health was practical. Workplace safety was practical. Society was trying to survive. The class pattern was complex. The trading and middle classes often supported market expansion. The landed aristocracy resisted some market changes because they threatened old social order. The industrial working class resisted because the market threatened bodies, wages, and families. So the double movement was not just rich against poor. It was a conflict over what society should protect and what the market should be allowed to touch. That question did not stay peaceful. It hardened into deadlock. Over time, the two movements jammed the system. Labor used democracy and parliament to demand protection. Capital used control over industry, investment, and production to resist. Politics and economics pulled against each other. In the 1920s, many governments tried to restore the gold standard. That meant deflation, cut wages, cut spending, reduce social services, protect the currency. Imagine a heavy gold coin placed on top of a family budget. Food, rent, school, medicine, everything underneath gets crushed. That was the political meaning of gold discipline. Democracy was under pressure because voters wanted protection, but financial orthodoxy demanded sacrifice. Capital feared too much intervention. Workers feared starvation and unemployment. The result was class deadlock. Parliaments could not easily satisfy markets. Markets could not easily tolerate democracy. The machine froze, and when a society freezes, people begin looking for someone who promises to force it open. When a society cannot solve basic conflicts, fear spreads. People lose jobs. Businesses stop investing. Governments look weak. Newspapers shout crisis. Crowds gather. Parliaments become symbols of delay. Polanyi believed this paralysis helped open the door to extreme politics. Then the golden thread snapped. In the early 1930s, the international gold standard broke apart. Britain left gold in 1931. The United States followed soon after. The old 19th century order had failed. For Polanyi, this was not only a financial event, it was a civilizational break. The promise had been simple: let markets regulate themselves, let gold discipline nations, let prices guide society, but the result was depression, political crisis, and social fear. When people feel abandoned by ordinary institutions, they look for harder answers. They want protection, they want certainty, they want order. That is where the next danger entered: fascism. Polanyi did not see fascism as a random accident. He saw it as a response to a deadlocked market society. When democracy tried to protect society, markets resisted. When markets demanded sacrifice, society resisted. Fascism offered a terrible bargain. Promised to make the economy function again, but the price was freedom. Unions could be crushed, parliaments could be closed, political opposition could be destroyed, human equality could be denied. In Polanyi's view, fascism saved the market order by sacrificing democracy. That is a grim argument, and it should be handled carefully. It does not mean every crisis leads to fascism. It does not mean economics explains everything, but Polanyi wanted us to see the connection. The old civilization was not destroyed only by enemies outside it. It was damaged by the measures society took to survive a market system that had become unbearable. The market society consumed its own foundations. That was his warning. Polanyi's argument is powerful, but it is not beyond criticism. Some scholars point to a paradox. If a purely self-regulating market could never really exist, how could its failure explain the crisis? Was the market impossible, or did it exist enough to damage society? Others argue that Polanyi accepted too much of his opponent's language. He sometimes described the market as if it had a pure form. Real markets are always built by laws, customs, states, and power. There is also a historical challenge. Polanyi sometimes seemed to suggest that profit-seeking was not important before the 19th century. Modern historians disagree. Ancient people traded, merchants watched prices. Long-distance commerce existed. So the stronger version of Polanyi is not that markets never existed before. They did. The stronger point is this. Before modern market society, markets were usually limited by other social rules. The 19th century tried something more extreme. It tried to make the market the ruling principle. Ancient Mesopotamia had merchants. Clay tablets recorded prices, debts, and shipments. People noticed supply and demand. They were not modern capitalists, but they were not marketless either. Archaeologists have found similar complexity elsewhere. In the classic Mayan world, obsidian blade makers adjusted production based on distance and transport cost. That means people were calculating value long before modern capitalism. This matters because it corrects Polanyi. Human beings did not suddenly discover economic calculation in 1800, but Polanyi can still be useful. The question is not whether markets existed. The question is whether society was forced to obey them. The Speenhamland debate shows the same pattern. Polanyi's details were not always right. The 1834 report was biased. Speenhamland may not have caused the poverty trap he described, but the larger issue remains. How does a society decide who must bear the cost of market rules? Who pays when the market is protected? And who is protected when the market fails? Modern historians point to other causes of rural poverty: enclosure, threshing machines, price shocks, deflation, gold standard pressure. That makes the story more complex, but complexity does not erase the main insight. Market society can push risk downward. onto workers, onto families, onto villages, onto nature. In the late 20th century, Polanyi became relevant again. From the 1980s and 1990s, many countries embraced deregulation, privatization, and hyper-globalization. The dream returned. Let markets move freely. Let capital cross borders. Let competition discipline society. But new fictitious commodities appeared. Data became one. Your clicks, your location, your habits, your face, your attention. These were not produced like shoes, but platforms could collect them, package them, and sell predictions based on them. It was a new enclosure, not of fields, but of human behavior. A fence became a server, a deed became a terms of service agreement. Gig labor is another modern version. A worker opens an app. The phone assigns a ride or delivery. The worker appears free, but the algorithm sets the route. The rating system applies pressure. Income changes by demand. The app can send the job. The app can lower the pay. The app can deactivate the worker. Risk moves to the worker. The person becomes labor on demand. Nature is also turned into markets in new ways. Carbon trading can put a price on pollution rights. This may help manage emissions, but it also shows Polanyi's old warning. Even the climate can be treated as something to buy and sell, so the double movement continues. Markets expand, society pushes back, workers demand protections, communities demand housing security, citizens demand climate rules. People ask for limits on platforms, banks, landlords, and pollution. This is not simply anti-market, it is society saying the market must not be allowed to swallow everything. Polanyi also warns us about danger. When mainstream politics fails to protect people, anger does not disappear. It looks for a home. Sometimes it turns toward democracy, but sometimes it turns toward authoritarian promises, simple enemies, closed borders, strongmen. Fear can become political fuel. That is why Polanyi's final question still matters. How can a complex society be free? His answer was not to destroy markets. Markets can be useful, prices can help coordinate goods, trade can connect people, but markets need limits. Labor is human life, land is nature, money is a social institution, data is human behavior, climate is the condition of life. The invisible pattern is this: markets are not nature. They are made by laws, by states, by contracts, by police, by banks, by platforms, by choices. And if markets are made, they can also be remade. The question is not whether society needs markets. The question is whether markets serve society, or society serves markets.